welcome to the Culture Couch Live. We're going to take some live questions. So, boys, welcome to Emil, Woz, and Jez. How are you all?
G'day, Rizzy. How are you, mate?
Looking pretty flash there. Woz, you got all those? You read all those books, Woz, or not?
Yeah. It's I just got through them all last night. It was a huge effort, and feeling the wiser for it.
All right. Well, don't fall asleep then today, okay? Right, guys. So we're going to take questions. So we're going to take questions today. We'll probably stick with 3. Unless you're really, really insightful, and I might add another one, but I'm not that confident, to be honest. So first question is from Peter. All right, guys. So do you generally start with teams that are low performing? So, Jez, I might throw to you first because you've been doing this for the best part of sort of 20 to 30 years. So do you generally start with teams that are low performing?
It depends, Rizzy, on where each individual team's at. So we're more interested in where the leader sits and their appetite for change and their appetite to commit to the change that they're trying to implement. Because if you've got an underperforming team, but you've got a really good leader that wants to drive change and buy into a values-based leadership program, then you can do anything. But if you've got a team that's sort of mid-range and trying to get better with a poor leader, that's just as difficult as a low-performing team. So I'm not sure, Emil or Rizzy or Woz.
I might throw to Emil. It's because I think, Emil, what I would say is the earlier we get them, the better, isn't it, really? Because typically you just don't want them to drop to being a low-performing team. So if we can get a team, and if I liken it to sort of Sydney Swans versus Melbourne Footy Club, obviously Sydney were way easier to get from a 6 or 7 to a 10 than it was to get Melbourne. So we would recommend more so getting your team aligned earlier rather than later, wouldn't we, Emil?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been having some great success with some recent clients now, even Warren's other company, MediFarm Australia, starting off with the code and understanding the different personalities in the group and being able to engage in real talk has been a huge, huge benefit to them. And you are right, it is harder, it is more difficult to change a poor culture than be able to build something from the ground up. So the earlier the better. And to Jez's point, there really has to be a desire for change. And I think there also has to be a desire for continual improvement and being consistently challenged to improve, because that's essentially what the model's all about as well.
And Woz, you're probably well placed too. The 2 companies, the most recent companies, I won't mention both their names, but one was probably in that former where you let the culture drop a bit too far. Is that a fair comment? Whereas the one you're doing now, the CEO now, you really started from the ground up right at the start. There's a big difference between the 2.
Yeah, I think it's natural that ultimately, companies come or look for a solution at a time where they're failing. And, obviously that represents challenges. But if companies really understood that it would be better to implement a solution before you failed, then you would have a lot more successful companies in general. But the reality is companies don't generally reach out until something's going wrong. And that's where it's a tremendous undertaking to go through that exercise to fix the issues that are there. But it's easier to implement a solution up front.
Yes, I think, Peter, just in a summary to your question, we'd probably ask you to start when you're more of a high-performing team than you drop off. That would be the key to it, because, we'll back our system in any scenario, but the sooner the better. Next question, guys, is for Jay.
Sorry, Rizzy. I just want to reinforce the point, though, that the leader has to be committed to developing the team and driving the change. Because it doesn't matter what we do, if you've got a leader that isn't prepared to actually drive the change, then don't bother.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, no question. Question 2 is from Jane. How do you manage different personalities? So I might throw to you, Woz, sort of straight away, because I know you've done some work on your own profiling, and that has really helped you, I guess, firstly, understanding yourself. When we talk about managing different personalities, understanding yourself is really, really critical. And then how do you find managing other personalities?
Yeah, I think the first learning is understanding that there are different personalities. I think even to reflect in the footy days that, the old aggressive coach that came in and managed everyone with the same mantra, and that's, you know, get out there and do everything as good as you can and as hard as you can, and realizing that type of methodology doesn't work for everybody, and understanding the different profiles react and behave differently based on how you manage them is the first key aspect or key attribute to a good leader. But then understanding how you get most out of people, specifically, I think more so under pressure, under stress. So where do people revert to when things aren't going necessarily as well? And then when they don't go as well, how do you, say, bring that person back into an element to which they feel more comfortable to get on with things and don't digress in the issue itself, and then support them through that particular challenge. I think most of the time as a leader, myself specifically, when things aren't going well, I obviously revert to my sort of negative energy, and that obviously increases negative energy throughout the business. So understanding when you're under pressure and under stress that you have to revert to, say, the opposite type of behavior, but understanding that others are doing that as well, and recognizing when they're doing it and how you can support them throughout that is really how you become a good leader, in fact. And knowing each people at that sort of deeper level of personality profiling is a very successful attribute as a leader yourself.
Yeah, and boys, to Jez and Emil, it's certainly one of my favourite sections of the workshop. I love the profiling because, as to Waz's point, I mean,
that's just because you're a green and a caring sort of person. That's why you like the profiling, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yeah, and we've just seen your profile because you've just interrupted me.
Mine's higher than yours, Jez.
But I think to Waz's point, it's funny when you grew up in a sporting environment in Australia, it was top down all the time, wasn't it, Merv? Yeah. So you work with a lot of footy clubs, and I think the biggest change has really been around profiling and understanding what it takes to be a leader. And I talk about leadership being quite exhausting. So maybe expanding on that, Murph, and you and I have had good conversations around that as well.
Yeah, it's what's said. It's about understanding yourself as a leader, and then how you can communicate most effectively with the members of the team. But then if you go down into the team, how do the different members of the team communicate with each other? So how do I give you feedback, Ruzi? As a high red, how do I give you feedback as a caring green? I have to be more thoughtful about it. I have to pick the right time, right place, do it the right way, so that I'm taking into consideration the fact that you're going to see it differently than I am. And so I should never change what I have to say, but I will change where I say it, when I say it, and how I say it, based on understanding you better. And I think that if we can get the team to understand the differences between individuals, but at the same time respect the fact that behaviours always override my personal preference, then you get to a place where the team can really start to perform well.
And I think this is a good example of our group ourselves, because for those who haven't done the profiling, I won't try and confuse you too much, but one of the systems we do is based on colour. So I'm a green, got two reds, and Emil, you're a yellow. So explain that in the context, and maybe put some context around the colours as well. But we are very different as a leadership team here, but we all get on really well because we understand each other. So from your perspective, how does that look for you?
It's been quite remarkable before you started, Emil, that you've been able to keep quiet for so long, to be frank.
I've learnt to, because...
Good segue.
Yeah. I'm just going to leave that, actually. I'm going to leave it. But look, for a lot of teams there, it is quite eye-opening, the profiling, and for a lot of people, one of the things we often hear is, I'm so glad I learned about the profiling, because now I'm not as critical on myself anymore. So that first piece of self-awareness is really big. And then when you get more calm, even Wazzy, you're a great example. The way you start to lead and communicate to your people changed quite quickly, because you're very outcome-driven and task-oriented. So understanding that certain people would like things in writing before you talk about it. Some people just want to start talking straight away. Some people you need to book it, don't interrupt their schedule and all that. The communication style piece is really big, because it helps you speak to people's listening, doesn't it? And then ultimately, if your job as a leader is to create an environment for other people to perform, certain people will perform in this environment and some people will perform in this environment. So being able to understand that is absolutely critical. And look, honestly, every leader out there, if you literally have not done personality profiling or psychometric profiling, understand the basics, then you need to pull your finger out pretty quickly because it's absolutely integral in my eyes.
Ruzi, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Just based on that, because I know you and I've been doing a bit of work together lately. One of the things that's always amazed me about you, as a caring, again, a high green, caring, thoughtful, empathetic. How did you go coaching an AFL club? Because surely it's not the typical profile, I guess, for an AFL coach, or even probably a CEO of the bigger companies.
Yeah, and I talk about a lot how we all do about, you've got to step out of your colours, and you can't use your profile as an excuse.
Yeah.
As an excuse not to behave the way you want to. And I think to the self-awareness, understanding your own profile. But I just knew that to drive a high-performing team, you've got to drive high standards. It's not a option. It's if you want a high-performing team, you have to do it. So as a green, sort of more caring type person, you still have to be direct and step into your red sort of thing. But it's fascinating because I'm learning a lot more about it, having sat in with you two boys on the profiling. But I think it's the way greens and blues do it. It's just different, because if you have a green and blue
example, like of where
and we've talked a lot about this in the recent workshop. So for the green blue is more caring and analytical. So a green blue, to give real direct feedback, still wraps their arms around people and still does it in a caring manner. And we've all seen it where that quiet person suddenly speaks up and it becomes really, really powerful. And part of the conversation, Murph, on the back of a group we worked with last week, we were speaking to a green blue and we said, the way you do it is very impactful because when you speak, people will definitely listen and you'll just do it in a different way. But to the original point, don't use your profile as a cop-out. I think that's the biggest thing I would say. You to be a leader, you have to be part red. You have to be yellow, you have to be blue, you have to be green. And you have to work in and out of those colours. And I think that's the most important part of it. And don't let your profile overshadow your behaviours. And that's what we would always say. And Murph, I've heard you talk a lot about it. And the follow-up question's a great one on the back of that. So the final question from Sarah is, what do you do with talented people who won't follow the team rules? Which is really interesting. Really interesting on the back of profiling, because what we're saying collectively is understand yourself and understand each other.
Yeah.
But to that point, which is probably the question we most get asked, was how do you deal with the talented people that don't follow the rules?
Yeah, I'm really experienced with this. I think ultimately you've got to be careful of, obviously in organisations, specifically when businesses are led by revenue and sales, that sometimes those particular individuals fall in that sales sort of department. And, ultimately if their outcome or their KPI is to actually deliver revenue or sales to the business and they're doing so in a good fashion, a lot of companies find it very difficult to manage those people if they're not necessarily the right individuals in terms of their behaviour and their interaction with others. And that becomes quite toxic. And you've got to be careful about how much influence the behaviour in terms of relationships that can really drive down people's, we call apathy in terms of how they rock up every day, how much they care about the business. Are they on seek looking for new jobs? You'd be surprised about that particular individual and how toxic that can sort of leak into the organisation and cause problems. To the extent that, for us, when we ran through this program, obviously I've been a guinea pig of having the Performance by Design system run on myself. That, through the exercise of running this system, we had a couple of quite good individual performers leave. And surprisingly enough, through the exercise of doing so, the people behind them or below them or around them actually stepped up and took on the role of the individuals that were sort of deemed to be high performers because of the individual KPIs that they were achieving. And it was a real shock to me because, usually if someone leaves, your natural reaction is, oh, we'll have to go and replace them. But to know that that individual and their behaviour was driving down the interaction or the actions of others, and them not actually turning up and doing a good job on a day-to-day basis, was a real learning for me. And that's something I think we find a lot in organisations, that they won't manage someone out because of the risk of what it's going to do to the business from maybe a revenue perspective or something else. But don't underestimate the power of removing that someone and the individuals around them, and what that means to them, sort of the commitment to, as the leader or the business themselves, and that you're going to make those changes, even if that person is an individual performer at a successful level from a KPI perspective. I think that's a real big learning as a group, and something that we have to educate leaders on all the time, about that going through that exercise, as nervous or anxious as you can be of removing that person, and the impact of doing so.
And one of arguably the single most important slide that you both put up, Emil and Jared, from my point of view, is team versus talent. That slide that develops trust. So Murph and Emil, maybe Murph first, just pick up on that, because that really is the essence of when you're talking about that talented player or talented person that's really not building trust in the organisation, though, are they?
Yeah, I think to Waz's point, you need to make sure that you create really clear behaviours and values. And then we would also say, give them a chance first. So work with that person to see if they can make the transition. But ultimately, if they can't do what's best for the team first, and they keep reverting to what's best for them, then they probably have to go. And as what it says, you'll be amazed how quickly people come up underneath them. So it's a great point. But while we joke about, get rid of them, the truth is always give people the opportunity to change, because sometimes people just get into the habit of behaving badly. And if you give them an opportunity or a process that allows them to say, okay, I'm going to have a fresh start, let's do it, they can. And I know that in sport, there's lots of really good examples. Ruzi, have you had guys actually come into leadership groups who've actually, initially you might have thought, oh, they may not make it, but people do make an effort.
Step up. Yeah,
it's a great point, because setting the framework, and often with those people, those talented people, we probably think they're not going to make it. But we've seen them in footy clubs. And Emil, I'm going to throw this to you, because they can become almost your most valuable person. If you see a talented person fall into line and become team and talent, suddenly you've got this incredible high performer, haven't you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Gary Ablett Jr. is a pretty good example, isn't he? Super talented, and then, made that big change, got himself fit, worked harder, and from the feedback from his teammates, and became, probably a generational player. And look, that's one of my most rewarding experiences doing this work, is helping, to Jez's point, giving the individual the opportunity to make change, giving them the direct feedback. If they're a talented person and they're not doing what's best for the team, it's about behaviour, isn't it? The conversation's about behaviour. Over the next 6 to 8 weeks, John or Jenny, we'd like to see these behaviours change, because when they do, and Jez, you would have seen it way more times than all of us, when that talented person moves into that top quadrant where they're team and talent, they are usually a centre of influence anyway, because they're talented and getting good results. So people sort of look to them for guidance. But when they start to change behaviour and start to bring people with them, they just bring the whole organisation with them. Now, at the other time, if they don't change behaviour, then there has to be a timeline around it. I'm always saying that to clients. There has to be a timeline to change from this point to that point. Otherwise, the cycle just keeps going, and then everyone goes, oh, it's okay to behave badly inside our organisation. And we know that culture is all about behaviour. So, the conversation is about behaviour. Give them the chance. And as you point out all the time, let them act their way in or act their way out.
Yeah, great. I think that's a great point to finish on. Act your way in, give them a roadmap. They can act their way in, act their way out of the system. So, guys, thanks a lot. Hopefully there's a bit of gold there for the people listening on the Culture Couch Live, which is the first one we've done. But we look forward to seeing everyone again next week.